It's really an amazing experience to be here at this conference. And also to be here in Dayton, Ohio. What a year, right? Now, not many people know this fact, but I'm going to fill you in. I'm a last-minute replacement for Coach Archie Miller. Apparently, he got a better offer from a writers' conference at Marquette. No, but he's coming back for basketball. We don't have to worry about that. I'm not a stand-up comic, although a lot of people seem to feel I should be. Whenever I take the stage, the first thing I hear is, "Stand up, dude!" But despite the public demand, I remain a writer, committed to a life of quiet masochism. Well, yeah, okay, it's fun, right? We know that from the workshops, but come on, it's hard. It's hard. Unlike being a stand-up, the only way for a writer to make sure he has that one drunk around who appreciates his humor is to marry her. Foolishly, I married a teetotaler. But talking about writing, my favorite description of being a writer comes from Stephen King. Somebody once asked him, "Stephen, why do you always have to write that creepy stuff?" And he said, "Do you think I have a choice?" And that's a really, really observant line, because writers have to write whether we want to or not. And whatever it is that's lurking deep inside our souls has a mind of its own, spewing out words that surprise us with both delight and horror. And in the case of E.L. James, cash. I arrived at the novelist profession late in life. My first book, Elevating Overman, was published in May of 2012, and my second, Cascade Falls, will be released next fall or winter, which amounts to decades of some serious procrastination. Or as Erma liked to call it, sorry I'm late syndrome. When I'm asked to describe my sorry I'm late years, the adjectives that come to mind are mundane, disturbing, bizarre. Oh yeah, and poor. I moved from New York to Los Angeles at the age of 22, and I had to take temp jobs, one of which was operating a price tag cutting machine at a ladies' clothing factory in Burbank. Now, it's mundane for obvious reasons, but it's disturbing because it means I'm old enough to have actually participated in goods being manufactured in America. Further along my procrastination highway, I'm just going to give you bits and pieces of some of the ridiculous things I've done. I had the privilege of working as an assistant film editor on a black exploitation film. Do you guys remember those? They were called blaxploitation when they wanted to get all sexy. The film that I worked on was a takeoff on the Warren Beatty film Shampoo, which of course we all remember. So what do you guys think the name of this movie was? Black Shampoo. Which is just so weird. I mean, can you imagine somebody deciding to make Black August Osage County? You know, Samuel L. Jackson is addicted to Vicodin and insulting people. It just don't work. But you'll be happy to know that I did have enough dignity to turn down Black Benji. So many sketchy jobs after that. I hit the skids for about, 30 years or so. I was banished to a hazy purgatory that, to the best of my memory, was known as sitcom. Okay, it wasn't exactly the skids, but while it might seem exciting to hobnob with stars and wear tuxedos to award shows, there's a major yang to that yin. 80-hour work weeks, so many meals out of plastic containers, you forget what plates and silverware look like. And as a reward, the show you're working on gets canceled, and you get to scrounge around for new opportunities to eat out of plastic containers. Which leads us to the bizarre. There's no shortage of it in Hollywood, and I grant you, sometimes bizarre can be fun. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yeah. Working in television, you inevitably find yourself in situations you would never think to write about, And even if you did, you wouldn't put them on paper because they'd seem too unbelievable. Let me give you an example of a bizarre meeting I once took in Hollywood, because that's what they call it in the entertainment business, taking a meeting. Do you guys remember the late Aaron Spelling, the producer, famous producer? He did Charlie's Angels, Fantasy Island, Beverly Hills 90210. He built a house for his wife that was like 900,000 square feet. It was famous. One day I get a call from my agent saying that Aaron Spelling's company has a sitcom idea they want to run by me to see if I want to write. The agent tells me I'll be meeting with Aaron's development executive, let's call him Jack, and that their idea is to do a comedy skewering the behind-the-scenes drama at a show like Beverly Hills 90210. So it sounds like fun, you know, get behind the scenes of one of these soap opera type shows. Sure, I'll go. So I show up at the office to meet with the development executive, Jack. He comes out and shakes my hand. He says, okay, I'm going to take you in to see Aaron. The minute he's done pitching you the show, I'll stand up and shake your hand and you can leave. I'm immediately thrown. Number one, because it seems that I'm going to be meeting with the legend himself, who's going to be pitching me a show to sell me on writing it. And number two, for some reason, this development executive doesn't want me to have to comment on whatever it is that Mr. Spelling is going to pitch to me. Maybe he's afraid I wouldn't like it and I'd be put on the spot in front of a television god. Whatever the reasoning, I followed Jack into an office the size of a football field. The only difference being that this artificial turf is made of green shag carpeting. I look around and see an Aaron Spelling pinball machine in the corner. And then I see the real Aaron Spelling wearing a cardigan and smoking a pipe coming toward me to shake my hand. He has a warm and welcoming smile and he says he's thrilled that I could make the meeting. I like this guy. When we sit down, he tells me that his proposed show would be all mine. He doesn't need the glory or the money at this point. He's just happy to share his idea with a world-class writer. I love this guy. Now Mr. Spelling is ready to pitch to me. I'm already thinking of hilarious 90210 subplots, and then he begins. Bruce, the show is about a male genie. Obviously, my agent had his information wrong. And I now know why Jack didn't want me to have to comment. This isn't an animated series. It isn't a parody of genie shows. This is an actual genie show that somebody wants to do in the year 2001 or 2. And what's going through my mind, maybe this is not Mr. Spelling's best idea. But he continues his pitch. The network thinks it's kind of old-fashioned, but I told them, this genie is young and hip, like you, Bruce. I really love this guy. And suddenly the idea doesn't seem that bad. Mr. Spelling goes on to explain that this genie goes to hip bars and restaurants and dresses very stylishly. Kind of like you, Bruce. I know, right? It's unbelievable. And then it hits me. This genie idea is fantastic. Seinfeld would kill for a genie like this. So I start to get very animated, suggesting a hip kind of bottle the genie could come out of, and cool genie names like Flash or Jet. And I'm having a blast. The development executive, Jack, is looking over at me like I'm crazy. You know, like, what are you doing? But I'm determined to spend as much time on this shag football field as necessary to land this gig. So then there's maybe a 4-second lag in the conversation, at which point Jack stands up and says, "Thank you for coming in, Bruce." Aaron then stands, shake my hands, and asks me, "Did you park in the building?" He wants my parking ticket, which he proceeds to take and hand stamp himself. This guy's worth an amazing amount of money. So I get in my car and I try to reconcile whether what just happened was real or if I had visited Fantasy Island. My wish being to someday have a billionaire validate my parking. I never heard from them again. And the male genie show never got made. So maybe it was a fantasy. The reason I tell you this story, because as goofy as it is, it illustrates the kind of material we TV writers are obliged to consider if we enjoy things like paying our rent. At that point, I'd already had some success. So had I come to my senses, I could have turned down the job I was ultimately never even offered. But in the beginning, you take what you can get. So to prove that, I now admit before a jury of my peers, and this is not easy, but many years before I did coach and was the executive producer of Home Improvement, I worked on a show called Webster. Okay. Now, some of you are thinking, oh, that little guy was cute, and, Alex Karras, he was really funny in Blazing Saddles. Well, this wasn't Blazing Saddles, people. This was god-awful television. Alex Karras was bored out of his mind and had trouble memorizing the scripts. In one episode, he's playing Santa Claus. They start to shoot the scene. He looks at the camera and says, "Ho, ho, line, please." It was an absurd experience. No matter how prestigious your pedigree, every Hollywood comedy writer has been associated with at least one of these stinkers. And because television devours so much product, there are endless opportunities to feel like you're contributing to the wholesale destruction of human intelligence. One of my first jobs was on an ill-conceived sitcom starring the great actor Brian Dennehy. You guys know Brian? He played a fireman with a teenage daughter who wanted to be a country western singer and a son who had an IQ of 12. Because on television, dumb characters are always funny, right? Not so much. One day, I was standing around with Brian, and I turned to him, and I said, "Brian, why are you doing this crap?" And he said, "I just bought a boat." And, you do what you have to do, and you write the best you know how, but sometimes it just is what it is. I distinctly remember being in one writing room at 3 in the morning and thinking to myself, at least I'm knocked out when they do my colonoscopy. But it's Hollywood comedy writing. You're thinking, what could be better than that? Well, it's true that getting paid to sit in a room with funny people telling jokes is slightly more desirable than being a slate picker in a coal mine. I grant you that. And the thrill of seeing a gifted performer like Craig T. Nelson or Tim Allen get huge laughs from lines you've written, there's no price tag you can put on that, even if you're operating the machine yourself, like I was in Burbank. And by the way, if anybody had an itchy price tag in the late 70s, I apologize. I wasn't very good at working the machine. Having a career that's rooted in laughter can be so much fun it becomes addicting, which is part of the reason many sitcom writers do it for as long as they can. In multi-camera shows, which are shot in front of a live audience, it's like putting on a play every week. You sit around a table on Monday morning and listen to the actors read the script. Then you go upstairs with the other writers and change what didn't work. The refining process continues with the actors rehearsing day after day, you working night after night, until Friday night, show night, when you bask in the brilliance you and your co-conspirators have put into these actors' mouths. Then, just as you finish congratulating yourself, you realize that you have to do it all over again starting Monday morning. 79 hours of stress leading up to 1 hour of fun, but it's a hell of a great hour. Now, eventually, the talented and persistent writer does get the opportunity to work on better material, the promised land being the chance to write your own original projects, be they pilots or feature films. This is always a revelatory moment. You've put in the hard work, the long hours. Now you get to show what you're all about and put your individual creative stamp on the world. But there are landmines here too. Take this scenario. A screenwriter finishes his passion project. It's a coming-of-age story about a boy who, despite an abusive father and an alcoholic mother, not only manages to survive, but become an exemplary man in the process. The screenwriter believes it's the best work he's ever produced. He turns in the draft, and the agent calls to say that the studio is doing backflips. Everybody loves it. A meeting is scheduled, the writer just counting the days until he gets showered with praise, or writer's crack, as I like to call it. Writers love to hear how great our writing is. You know what I'm talking about. Say a burglar breaks into your house and he's in the process of stealing everything you own, and it turns out he's seen one of your shows, and he says, "Hey, you're really funny." And, "Gee, thanks," you say, as he hauls out all your stuff and brings it to his car. He thinks I'm funny. So back to our screenwriter, our impassioned screenwriter. The big day arrives, and he goes to meet with the studio. The executive greets him with a bear hug and says that the poignant story of this boy touched him so deeply that he only has one note on the entire script. The writer is pinching himself as he imagined his vision being brought to the big screen pure and unscathed. He asks, well, what's the one note? And the executive says, can you make the boy a dog? Obviously changing everything. Of course, there are exceptions to this kind of heartbreak. Somebody got to make Breaking Bad, and somebody got to make Seinfeld. But the majority of a writer's career in Hollywood is spent making the boy a dog, twisting and turning your vision into someone else's homogenized vision of it. Sometimes the bad guy is the studio or the network exec. Other times it's the star. And most tragically, it can be one of our own, the executive producer who's another writer, and he's the person to whom we report, he or she. Sometimes we're there till 3 in the morning because we get behind on scripts. Other times, it's because the showrunner has no wife or husband to go home to, so we become their substitute family and they need someone to talk to. One night I was in a room like that, endlessly going over the script and not making it better. The writer sitting across the table from me was so miserable that he said, Bruce, I want you to go to the parking lot, get in your car, drive it through this wall, and run me over. And I replied, only if you can guarantee that I die in the process. Sometimes it can be that painful. But, the sitcom process, which, as you know, is a group process, you want to be a team player in the writer's room because it's designed to be a collaborative medium. But being one of the gang year after year, show after show, has a way of muddying whatever singular voice drove you to be a writer in the first place. The cry from your unconscious you were certain was so unique, it demanded to be heard. Sometimes what happens to sitcom writers is that their entire world becomes the writer's room. Working all those hours gives you very little contact with how real people live and what's going on in society. The most ironic thing is when you're writing a family show, but you're always working, so you never get to see your own family. And that's happened to me on many occasions. Now, granted, TV pays better than blogs and tweets, but at least those blogs and tweets are yours, generated by something by you as an individual. You can keep the boy a boy, you can make him gay, transgender, or if it happens to strike your fancy, you can also make him a dog. The point is that any species change is dictated by you, the writer. Writing for television and having your Hollywood masters be the ones picking the species inevitably makes you question what species they are. The cumulative effect of all this is that once you leave television, be it voluntarily or involuntarily, you have to regroup and try to remember, who am I? What do I have to say that's different from every other writer pitching jokes around a table, or every other blogger for that matter? For me personally, I had to ask myself, who was I? And what made me think I had anything to say in the first place? Few brief historical tidbits. I was born in New York City, graduated from NYU. I spent my first 5 years of life in Fresh Meadows, Queens, growing up in an apartment building full of other middle-class Jewish families. When my parents decided to move to our own house on Long Island, I thought we must have been bad people. Why else would we be sentenced to a place where our best friends no longer lived across the hall? Having a single-family house made no sense to a kid who had seen the other side. But Long Island proved to be a new universe, the beginning of the suburban American dream that Erma so brilliantly captured in her columns. It was a huge change for me. I shot up to 4'2". I learned that the next best thing to being tall was being funny. I wasn't the class clown, but as Eugene Levy said in Waiting for Guffman, I sat next to the class clown and I picked up a lot of tips from him. I also picked up and would continue to collect stories from my loving but neurotic family whose strong suits were guilt and force feeding. One of the most popular sports in our house was being offended. I'm not kidding. My mother either invented or perfected the term standing on ceremony. Here's what I mean. One winter, many years after I moved to California, I think this was in the early 90s, my parents called from Long Island to tell me there's been a big storm and power outage, and they have no heat. They're sitting in the kitchen, my father in a ski parka, my mother in a full-length mink coat. They have no idea when the power will be restored. I asked my mother if my aunt and uncle, who live a little further out on the island, have power, and my mother says, yes, they do. I suggest that perhaps my parents might want to stay with them. My mother says, we talked to them. I ask, did they invite you to stay with them? My mother says, yes, they did, but they didn't insist. My mother denies this story to this day, but it is totally true. Who could make that up? And so my parents remained in the kitchen for many more hours. My mother kept warm by her mink and her pride. So these personal memories, which we all have, and which Erma mined to perfection, are the germs of what makes us the writers we are. You can script a perfect Modern Families episode, but it's still Modern Family, not your family. We need to remember the experiences that make us unique and use them as fuel for what goes down on the page, which is not to say that everything that happens to us is worth writing about. That's true. As an exercise, it's fine, but you got to be able to edit. And part of our job is to be able to do that and identify what are the gems hiding in the mounds of data we all collect. And we've got to constantly keep our eyes and ears open for the oddities of life that cross our paths. Now, luckily, I always seem to be a magnet for this stuff. Wherever I go, weird people come up to me, and I don't know why. Back when I was running TV shows, I joined a gym for a few years, never realizing that the retired professional wrestler with a beard dyed 3 different colors would wind up a character in my first novel, Elevating Overman. But he was there. I had collected him in my unconscious. For years, I spent every Christmas with my in-laws in Phoenix, clueless that that city would become the setting and linchpin of my second novel, Cascade Falls. I had no idea that I would one day ditch sitcom for writing novels, but paying attention to my surroundings and all of these characters gave me a lot to work with and ultimately saved my butt because I had a lot to write about. So what propelled, for me, the transition from television to books? I've been doing TV for 20 plus years. I was executive producing a show called Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Suddenly, my wife, Janice, got diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. So we talked about this with our doctors, and the doctor said, keep working. A comic mindset is going to help you. It's going to help you to keep working and negotiate the tough times. And I guess he was right, for a while. So I managed to finish up my 2 years at Sabrina, and then I went out starting to pitch my own pilots to the network, which I had done before, but now this was all I was doing. I was not working on other people's shows. I didn't want to work on other people's shows. So I'm pitching these pilots to the network, and I'm pitching to 25-year-olds who have no power to say yes. And all I can think of is my wife, who's fighting for her life, and I'm trying to create like the next Friends. And it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense for me to be writing a show like Friends. It didn't make sense for me to be pitching sitcoms at this point. It just didn't. So I walked away from TV pretty much cold turkey and devoted my time to being with my wife and kids until, unfortunately, Janice lost her battle. And obviously devastating. And, I had to process the grief of losing my partner and best friend. But eventually I started to wonder, what am I going to do with myself? What is the next chapter of my life? I still had the desire to write and write comedy, but I was completely burned out on making the boy a dog. That was over for me. I had started doing network TV at 27, and now I was twice that age. Whatever I did next couldn't be for anyone else. I had to write something that really came from me and reflected the person that I'd become. So my therapist, and I needed one badly at that point, asked me if I'd ever thought of writing a novel, and I had, but quickly dismissed the idea, my comfort zone being half-hour scripts. But now, for whatever reason, the idea of getting out of my comfort zone seemed like the most exciting thing that I could do. And I just wanted to dive into the unknown. So I know in the workshops, you guys have been doing exercises and stuff, and my exercise that I gave myself was invent a character, what are his flaws, what does he want, and how does he intend to go about getting it. So I came up with this dysfunctional protagonist, Ira Overman, a guy who has thrown away the first 55 years of his life, and he wants one more chance to change it. I finished 3 or 4 pages, and whether or not the work was any good, I found that I loved the freedom of writing prose. I got to explore my characters' internal thoughts without having them appear as clunky sitcom voiceovers. And even if I didn't write another word, it had been time well spent. Well, as luck would have it, one day I go to my mailbox, I pull out a copy of The Penny Saver. We all get that, we're ready to throw it away. And I see this ad that says, life-changing LASIK surgery, $299 an eye. And I thought, that's interesting. So I had Ira Overman. It became the springboard for the whole book. Overman, who had been wearing glasses since he was 4, decides that even a small change like improved vision would be a step up from where he is now. And as it turns out in the book, the LASIK not only makes him see better, but it makes him see differently, empowering him to accomplish things he never thought possible. The change is so dramatic that his best friend, Jake Rosenfarb, becomes convinced that Overman has morphed into some kind of superhero, and Rosenfarb offers to be his sidekick. The book takes many comic twists and turns, but at its core deals with atoning for one's mistakes and gaining insight into a life that matters. As I wrote this character who was searching for meaning and getting granted a second chance, I began to realize that Overman's journey was paralleling my own. After my wife's passing, I was searching and contemplating a second chance, albeit one I never wanted to take. So as I struggled with why bad things happen to good people, Overman wondered why good things were happening to a schlub like him. And the further I dug into the writing, the more our paths started crisscrossing, which frankly frightened me given his loser pedigree. But as his character started to blossom, I began to take heart. I suddenly realized that this flawed, middle-aged Jewish man from my imagination had given me my second chance. As Ira Overman had been elevated, so had Bruce Ferber. And as it turned out, this fictional adventure wound up helping me be a better father, open up as a human being, so I could meet my new and lovely wife, Lynn, which was fantastic. So then, the book gets published, and it marks the beginning of a whole new set of things career-wise. Instead of being locked in a sitcom room or in my own office, I was now traveling around the country on a book tour, talking about Overman, midlife awakenings, overcoming grief, things that mattered to me. It was a fantastic experience, and as any author on a book tour will tell you, a sobering one. Unlike the crowds at comedy clubs, you don't get many happy drunks at the Jewish Community Center in Denver. You might get a heckler or two, but that would mean that at least they're paying attention, which isn't always the case. One night, I'm speaking at a synagogue in Boca Raton, nice-sized audience of about 75, demographic 80 to 120. I'm roughly 4 minutes into my speech, and I start hearing the snoring. I look around, and I just keep going on. You just got to power through it, Afterward, the event's over, and the event arranger, this guy Steve, comes up to me. He says, "Bruce, you were fantastic." I said, "What are you talking about, Steve?" At least 10 people were sound asleep. He said, "That happens at every event at this synagogue. When they asked the rabbi how big the sanctuary is, he says it sleeps 600. So You know, and that put it all in perspective. I had to laugh and store that in my little file for the future. So I followed my passion, completely forgetting about show business, and then what happened, show business kind of came back to me. I was well into writing my second novel when people said, oh, Overman should be a movie. This would be a great movie. And the character, there are basically two people who would be great for this movie. One of them is Paul Giamatti, the other one is Jason Alexander. So I couldn't get the script to Paul Giamatti, but I had a friend who was doing a play with Jason. Jason was directing it, and I put the book in an envelope, and I wrote this little note saying, you know, you'll know by page 3 whether you think this is garbage, but just in case you like it, and, you know, who knows if you can get a movie made or if I can get a movie made, but I just want to know how you feel about this, because when you write a character and you envision somebody who can play it, it's kind of a kick to know that one of the funniest people you've ever seen on television might want to do it. So I don't hear from him. And then sure enough, 3 months later, he writes me an email saying, I love this, I want to do it, I want to make a movie out of it, and blah, blah, blah. And I know, I've been around long enough to know that when people say they want to make a movie of it, it could be 8 years, it could be 10 years, it could be not at all. But being the good self-promoting author that I am, the first thing I said to him, would you do the audiobook? And he nods his head, and he tells me that the last audiobook he recorded was Kirk Douglas's autobiography. And then he turns to me and he says, I do Kirk Douglas's book and I'm not going to do yours? Of course I'll do it. And he did such an awesome job, and he came into the studio with a different voice for every male and female character, and it's just hilarious. And I wish it was out now. It comes out May 1st. But it made me laugh so hard that I went right to work on the screenplay, which in about 8 or 25 years should be coming to a theater near you. And this November, coming to your local bookstores, is my new novel, Cascade Falls, which depicts a modern suburbia far removed from the innocent world where I grew up and where Erma spun her comic gold. Cascade Falls is a planned community in Phoenix, Arizona, a subdivided residential Disneyland in the middle of a bone-dry desert. It's a place where every street is named after a waterway, and the better golf courses have underground air conditioners. Can you imagine what Erma might have done with that one? Well, I hope I do her proud. I thank all of you for coming, and I thank Coach Archie Miller for not coming. Thank you, guys. Get him next year, Flyers.